Hello, this is Kris Nelson from evolveconsciousness.org. I'll be reading the article dealing with etymology relating to axioms, existence, consciousness, and identity. This was published on the 2nd of December 2014. This was a prequel to my series on language and reality. I didn't want to include it in there because it would just make it too big. So this was a foundational basis, just like other work on etymology, to understand the foundation of words and language that reflect our understanding of reality. So in order to properly understand how we communicate about reality, we need to have a proper understanding of the word symbols used in our language to communicate about reality. So that's why definitions are important. And they provide the same terms for us to be on the same page of understanding, so that we can be talking about the same thing rather than develop confusion from semantic misunderstandings. Here's a quote from my first article I ever made on my site back in 2013 on truth. And here's a quote regarding axioms to start it off. If we look at the etymology for axiom, we can see how important concepts are in our lives. An axiom is related to what we think is worthy, fit, of value, of weight. It comes from the Proto-Indo-European word agtio, with the root ag, meaning to drive, draw, and move. Axioms are those beliefs that we take into ourselves at a core level that drives us to draw us in a direction that moves us. They are weighty influences in our lives. It is important to not be deceived and manipulated into accepting falsities. Otherwise, the direction we go in may be built upon a flawed foundational understanding, a flawed foundational axiom. If you have garbage in, well, the only thing coming in, see, when you're learning, because it doesn't come from some magical higher self that feeds you information, it's you have to do the learning, and you have to figure out what is good and what is truth, and what is the right way and what is the moral way. We have the capacities in consciousness through the complexities of our body vehicles in order to develop our consciousness in greater degrees, to understand reality in greater degrees. So relating this to care, as you'll see I'm going to do, but right away you can see with relation to what we think is worthy, fit, of value, and weight to drive and draw us and move us, well, care also has the same thing. To drive, draw, and move us, or to generate us into a certain direction based on our recognition of our responsibility and what we need to do to maintain things and put things right, because we recognize the wrong. So we see ag, and if you remember the audio I just did, so these are the audio on kind, kin, genus, and care. That one I just did today, this morning. So I woke up at 5:30, and then at 6:30 I started the audio, and then it took me over an hour, and now I'm doing another one. So the one I just did had ga, and which is the source for care, and it's related to GE, so GA and GE, and GE is for gene and genus and generate, and has to do with care. So I explained that all in the previous audio in more elaboration than the text itself. And so we can see how they relate, and you can see how your drive to do something first. This is why the trinity of consciousness understanding is important, and there's people who think your care and your emotions come first, but they don't. First, you have to have a conception of reality in order to be affected by reality. You have to have an input through your thoughts that allow input to come in through your brain, that you form an understanding of the particulars in reality, and then they can affect you. And you can have a thought and meaning attributed to it, and then that produces a physiological reaction, as I've explained in the previous audio, and then that generates, that's what is recognized as an emotion, and then those emotions can fuel us to do things or not do things. But it always starts with thought, but the middle part, the care, is what will get us to do things, because if we just think about things, well, and you don't care to do anything, you're not going to go anywhere. So if you don't have true care, you're going nowhere, which is where the human race is going. because only a few of us really have the care developed to actually change things for the better. A lot of people, most people are running around in the hamster wheel of you're born, you live, you survive, you procreate, you enjoy life, and then you die. So they're not being taught anything from the higher self, from this alleged other identity, because it's not there. The higher self as another identity is not there. You're not being taught anything from God either. It's all within you, and you have to develop it. You have to develop the understanding of morality that you're capable of, because you have the consciousness capacity within you to understand it. And if you don't want to learn, you're not going to understand morality properly. You're not going to understand truth. You're not going to understand a lot of things. So all these things need to be learned and developed within us. So we have the capacity to understand reality and ourselves in greater degrees, but we have to actually learn and apply ourselves and do the work ourselves, because it's no one else, no other entity, no other thing anywhere else is going to do the work for us. We are in charge of our body vehicle. We are in charge of ourselves. Our consciousness rules us, and we can let other people rule us, and we're stupid, and we accept authority and enslavement, but we are the only ones that can rule us in self-governed, sovereign individual. So ag, as I showed above from agtio for axiom, ag relates to ga, ag relates to ga from kind, previous article, in meaning as well as being the inverse in letters. So not only is it ga, and now we have ag for axiom, they also relate in meaning, as I've been explaining with care. So ga indicates an association, togetherness, completeness, or wholeness. Ga relates to ge and genus, generation, and care. All of this generation, care, begetting, happening is the action, the effect that culminates from internal causal forces of consciousness, thought, and emotion. So that there's I'll just mention there's different aspects of care, where there's some that are emotion, but there's some that it's actually a driving force from emotions. So care itself is a bit delineated and separated from emotion itself as not just a thought plus meaning as a feeling that's generated, but as actual care itself to generate us to do something. Because you can have thoughts and emotions of other kinds, but the care is the thing above all the other emotions that leads us to the will to act. So it's not strictly an emotion, it's something greater than emotions. The other emotions bring us to aspects of care and generating or not generating, but the care is after the emotions, which I've also shown in the Trinity of Consciousness, well, in the Causality, Consciousness, and Trivium Circle of Life infographic I made. I put care as what motivates us. I put it after emotions, even though it's in some part of emotions. They're part of the internal aspects of consciousness, which thought are a part of as well. But I'm just making the delineation that there's the care where you have an emotion, but then there's the care to actually generate and do something from the emotional capacities. Alright, to continue. Action has the same source as axiom, ag, as I've mentioned in the previous audio, and in the article it's mentioned as well. G and K are interchangeable, and C and K are interchangeable. So, action, ag, ak, so the root is ak, you have ag, but it's also ak. So action and axiom, well, you see ag as the root. To get to ga, ga, the resulting complete wholeness of something manifesting, right? Because that's ga, ga and ge relating to generation, association, togetherness, completeness, wholeness. So the resulting from the process that results in something, the ge, the generation, into a complete wholeness of something manifesting, which is the GA of care, to bring us to the wholeness of manifesting something, you need ag. Ag, or axiom in action, is the drive, draw, and move. It drives us in a direction. A weighty influence in our lives is an active driving force. So we see how it all relates. All in etymology. It's pretty amazing. I don't know if you can see it, but that's why I'm trying to explain it in greater detail than my article. So you have care, and before that you have axioms, things that drive us. So our thoughts and our conceptions, and that's why we can be poisoned with garbage, and they'll poison our drives, and we'll have little care for things of truth, morality, and other beings. So you have the action, where you need for the care and the action, they're both related. So to get to ga, the resulting complete wholeness of something manifesting, the generation, something generated, well, you need the generative force inside the care that's going to associate things, and then you're going to eventually get to an action from your axiom that's in you, that's an active driving force that drives, draws, and moves us. So the ga that leads to care and the ag for axiom, they're related. They're interrelated. And again, that's why they're after the emotions, really, and they're interlinked in that infographic. And this was all before I even went into the etymology. You have care, and then right after you have will. And that's in between emotions and actions. Your care and your will are in between emotions and actions. These are from within consciousness. The driving force, the ag of the axioms, the care, the will, it's all from within that leads to doing things without in the external realm of effects, from the causal realm of the internal aspects of consciousness, the internal modalities of consciousness. These are images that reflect reality directly or indirectly through a conception. So when we have something that drives us, draws us, and moves us, well, we have images in our mind that reflect reality. It's a conception. We then generate with these internal forces the thoughts, emotions, and actions out into the world. At least that is how proper manifestation occurs in unity consciousness, where your thoughts, emotions culminate in unification with your actions that reflect your thoughts and emotions. Axioms are supposed to be rooted in reality to give us firm grounding in truth and have our perceptions and conceptions aligned with reality. But that does not always happen. Some of the most basic aspects about ourselves and reality need to be recognized. So I had a link to perception, reality versus perception, and how we process information in order to try to understand reality. Existence and consciousness are the basic two axioms to start from. So we have existence, things exist, and we have us, here we are consciousness. So those are the two basic forms of axioms to start from. You have to start from the ground, and then you can go upwards. But as I mentioned in an article I published last night on symbols, reality, knowledge, belief, and attachment, a lot of people go from induction, from reality to the universals, but they don't do enough deduction to verify if their universals are more validated, are veracious enough to be accepted through a correspondence of data points in reality, in the grounded reality of existence. So we have to start from existence and consciousness, and then with that accepted as the foundation, we can try to induce and derive universal concepts, but these are our imaginations, so they may not be completely accurate. And I've talked about, I've elaborated on this in previous audios in the last probably 3 or 4, not the last one on kin and kind and kin and genus and care, but the previous 2, 3 before that. So I'm on, this is I think audio number 65, and before that was 64. So I'd say 60, 61, 62, 63. Those ones have me elaborating more on this inductive-deductive process and how to properly verify your concepts in order to determine if they're more grounded in reality as opposed to other concepts. But they're still just concepts, and you can't always prove them. You can have a more degree of certainty, and some concepts can be proven. They can be proven in reality. Some of them are so detached from reality, such as God, you don't have much proof beyond the simple causal relation back into infinity. At some point it has to stop, and you have the prime mover, prime cause, first cause, unmovable mover, conceptually. That's the only, in terms of pure reasoning, that's the purest reasoning you can get as to start a validation for the existence of that aspect of higher dimension, or whatever, higher understanding of how things started, is through causality of the first cause. And then from there you can try to attribute more characteristics, and a lot of it is anthropomorphization in order to try to understand what can't be understood with reference to things that can be understood, such as existence and our own consciousness. So a lot of it is projection of anthropomorphic concepts based on us, but we can't really know what God is. You can, the more accurate path is to know what God is not, the apophatic path, and that's been dealt with a lot in history, and I think in Buddhism. But the apophatic path and the Neoplatonists, I think, if not Buddhism. So the apophatic path is just to recognize what God is not through just by recognizing, say that you look at the God of the Bible and the vengeful God, and he's all angry and he's all like a petty human. Well, clearly that's not the first cause, the transcendental being of truth, love, good, right, morality. Yeah, that's that being. No, it doesn't have an identity like we understand ourselves as. It's completely beyond our normal reference of understanding. It's beyond us. We can try to understand it by attributing aspects of ourselves to it through what we can manifest as what we understand as our true nature, our human nature, as a human being that we progressively develop into more degrees of being as a small b compared to that higher being with a big B. So we're trying to reflect ourselves based on that, in terms of what we understand conceptually as truth, love, good, and morality, the right things, truth, love, good, right, morality. So we associate it with that because it's what we view as what is good. And for some reason, I don't know, I guess I'd have to think about it more, but that's generally what people view is God is truth from Gandhi, and God is the good, and God is love, and all these things are they're conceptual things that relate to the same thing. So there's different people across history who've related things in this conceptual framework between us and the source. And then later that gets divided into more aspects, whether they're accurate or not, I don't know, but the one you can most closely go for a verification in universals is through, as I said, the first cause, the prime cause, the unmovable mover, through just a conceptual understanding of an origin in causality. So that's where you have the most verifiability, and then everything else we try to relate to ourselves, and it's a lot of anthropomorphization because we can't really know it. It's not a thing like us. It's not us. We are here. We are a bunch of things. The universe is a bunch of things. That is conceptually the one thing. So you can clearly see how it's not the same thing. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and the parts aren't a pure reflection of the whole. So we're trying to make sense of something we cannot completely make sense of because it's beyond our ability to completely make sense of. So we exist. So existence and consciousness are the two basic axioms to start from. We exist, things exist, and we are aware that things exist and that we exist. So we're aware of existence and we're aware of ourself as consciousness. These are the first basic observational points to start building knowledge from. These two foundational axiomatic points can always be used for grounding in all our conceptual frameworks. All other thoughts that do not lead back to these foundations can likely be regarded as pure imagination. If you can't trace things back to reality, well then it's just speculation, it's just imagination, it's just invention in your mind. Most likely. Maybe it is a truth, maybe we just can't prove it right now, but it's just concept. It's just a concept unless you can demonstrate it. So it might be true. Maybe there is a soul identity that has its own personality and things, and we keep reincarnating from there. But when I've reevaluated my beliefs, the possibilities that I've understood, well, when I started back from the ground up and inducing and deducing, nowhere did I come across a need for that intermediary. It's just not needed in my understanding. But I could be wrong. Like I said, I don't have an understanding of that prime universal, the most fundamental universal, the transcendental being. I can only try to understand aspects of it as best I can, and that's the information I present, but maybe it's wrong. I don't know. Yeah. So just like, I think it was Democritus who said, who first posited the existence of atoms, the unseen pieces, but that's just going in causality. So you can just go back in causality and say, oh, well, there's small pieces here and there's small pieces. Well, eventually there's even smaller pieces, and they thought that was indivisible, and they thought that the atom was the only indivisible thing. But see, they were wrong there, because we can divide the atom into the subatomic particles. And then even those can be divided, apparently. Maybe. Well, you have the atomic particles that can be divided. So that they thought the atom wasn't dividable, but the atom is further divisible into the electron, protons, and neutrons, and then those are further divisible into the subatomic particles. So although they had the concept through causality, a causal relation, just pure conceptual consciousness, understanding causality that, okay, well, there's a small unit and they called it the atom, and that's where we got the name for the atom from, I think. And yeah, so the atom, and then, oh, that was the indivisible. It was just a conceptual thing. They couldn't see the atom. It was just in causality. That's what they came up with. So using causality, you can try to derive some answers for things. And it can be true, and might be likely true, because we're dealing with causality and we understand how it functions. So yeah, there's smaller parts, and then there's smaller parts. And even in the generation of the universe, and I've talked about this in other audios, and for the origin of the concept of God, it also relates to the scientific domain of the Big Bang and the singularity. It's different concepts describing the same thing in different ways. It's all trying to attempt to find a causal answer for how did things get here, and to answer a question. How did we get here? It's just the origin, generation. That's why God is viewed as the generator. Generation, organization, and destruction, GOD. That's another acronym people have broken down in the English language. All other thoughts that do not lead back to these foundations can likely be regarded as pure imagination. If you can't relate it back to reality, which you can in causality, because eventually, well, we're here, so there was a source for why we're here, and well, the source for why I'm here is my parents, and then we go back to the universe, and the universe, well, they call it the Big Bang, and then the Big Bang comes from the singularity, and this is all the scientific view. So, in causality, you can just trace back and trace back and trace back, and then in their view, well, they have this, anyways, I'm going to keep going. Existence. Reality existent. Stand forth, come out, emerge, appear, be visible, come to light, arise, be produced, turn into. From ex, forth or out, and sister, to set, place, cause, stand. From Proto-European, si-st. So sister comes from there. So it's to stand out, to cause to stand out, to place out, to set forth, to set out. It's a reduplicated form of Proto-Indo-European sta, which is to stand, set down, make be firm, and derivatives meaning place or thing that is standing. So anything in existence is propped up, it's set in place, it's produced, it's standing forth, it's emergent, it has a cause to stand. Everything is standing. It's popped out. If you look at a page that's flat and you can't see anything, right? If you look at it just from the flat view as a horizontal plane, from that plane of base existence, so you could look at it as the implicate order, just as one basic flat field, and from there you're going to get the emergence of physicality and materiality that will cause existence, which is things to be set down. They're firm, they're not immaterial, they're firm, they're material, they stand, they're set in place, they're caused to stand, they stand out, they're arised from that plane, right? They're risen up, and that's reality, that's existence, the things we can see. If you look at the flat paper, you can't see it, but then the things that stand out from it, well, that's the things in existence, and that's where we start from, the things in existence. The flat plane of non-existence, well, that's not where we live. We live in existence. So we have to start from the ground up, from the particulars, and we can try to induce universals, and then further deduce those universals through a process of induction and deduction as a grammar logic spiral, and up and down, we keep going from the universals to the particulars and back up to the universals, always trying to determine the validity and veracity of our concepts, of our universal general ideas. So existence sets up, places, sets down, makes firm, sets forth, and causes to stand forth the extant objects within its framework model structure. Existence is reality. Existence is what is. So when we look at truth level 1 in my conceptual levels, truth level 1 is just reality, things that exist. It's what is. That's just a basic truth. And then in my understanding, I developed truth level 2, which is truth, love, good, right, morality, natural moral law, true self, higher will, God, source, all, spirit, etc. And that's what ought to be, is the aspects of the transcendental being that we can manifest through our consciousness and create into reality. So we can manifest the good, we can manifest the truth that ought to be, which is the right and the good and the moral, which is the true self, the higher will, God. God is good, God is truth. Understand? That's all the same thing, the transcendental being. So existence is what is. For you to talk about anything presupposes the necessity of existence. For you to talk about anything also presupposes the necessity of the existence of consciousness, the action, quality, or state-ness, which is what -nes means, the action, quality, or state of being conscious. That's what consciousness is. It's conscious, but it's an action, quality, or state of being conscious. That's what consciousness is. So consciousness itself is, from the 1630s, internal knowledge from conscious plus ness, meaning state of being aware. Action or quality, state of being conscious. And yes, animals have consciousness. They are able to operate in reality and move and interact and play with each other just like we can. They don't have the greatest capacity of creativity like we can, but they do have technological creative capacities. Birds build nests. That is a form of technology. They built something that wasn't there. They created it. Other animals can do other things too. We are the human animal, and there are other non-human animals, and we just happen to have the greater expressive capacity for consciousness and the greater creative capacity because we have the greater free will. We have more free will to do more evil or more good. That's our choice. Right now we're failing. We're doing a lot of evil. And there's the appearance of good. Just because there's the appearance of good doesn't mean there's no evil. Doesn't mean the evil isn't really bad. It means you're not seeing it. So yeah, things are, we have food and things are good, but there's still a lot of evil there. So conscious comes from conscious in Latin, knowing or aware, from conscire. And conscire, I don't know if I get into it here. I think I do, yeah. So con together and cire is knowledge, to know. The root of science as well, just to know things. So, meaning aware or knowing, particularly of one's surroundings or existence, conscious was brought into English around the turn of the 17th century as a learned borrowing from Latin conscius, knowing something with another. As I explain in this article briefly, and as well more in, I think it's Tracing Reality, a Visionary Quest to something. I forget the last word of my article. Visionary Quest to Wisdom, yeah. Is that it's to know something with another. It's with knowledge. Conscience and conscious, like conscience, morality, and conscious is to know as with knowledge. So, anyways, we'll get to that later. So, Latin conscious, knowing something with another. This was the adjective form of the Latin verb conscere, to be mutually aware. So, knowing something with another is mutual aware. From com and con, with and together, and cere, to know. This prolific verb is thought to have been a loan translation of Greek syneidos, to know, which likely was derived from the prehistoric Indo-European root ske, S-K-E-I, which is related to scale, as I've talked about in Analogy, Balance, and In Between, in relation to balance, which is by lengths. The lengths relates to Libra, and scales through scale, which also has shell and skull, relates to scale. So you have balance, scale, and this relates to S-K-A-E-I, what we're talking about in knowledge, because it's a cutting and a dividing. They're all rooted in cutting and dividing, and then you have logos, and that's collecting things. If I remember correctly, logos is collecting. From the Proto-Indo-European root leg, to collect. Then we have dialogue and dialect, and those all come from logos as well. And ratio, reason, rational, derive from the same thing. It's our ability to collect what is divided and what is cut in reality, because everything's separate and divided. It's not all one thing. The one thing is that highest level, the first prime mover. That would be the one thing. Everything else is divided, because in order for the multiplication from that one thing, conceptually, you have to divide. The more you divide, the more things there are. You divide 1 into 2 by 2. You divide 1, the first division is 2 things. And then you divide the 2 things again, then you'll have 4 things. And the 4 things become 8, 8 becomes 16, 16 become 32. And this is also a base aspect of programming. So when you understand programming, computer programming, you can understand, it'll help you understand a conceptual basis for how reality is constructed as well, and in different ways. Anyways, I've mentioned this in, I think, one of the last 3, 4, 5 audios. I've mentioned programming and how it can help us to understand how reality functions and how things build up in complexity from smaller base units, such as the duality of 1 and 0, which will be included in my natural law causality section presentation that I'm working on. So you get a hint of that programming relates to causality and 1-to-1 ratio, because it's 1s and 0s, and from there we develop greater complexity and greater ability and greater expressions through the programming, but it all starts from a base level. So we can see how causality relates to this as well, in terms of the prime mover. We have conscience, morality, and being conscious of something, is a conscience, innermost thoughts, desires, intentions, and feelings. knowledge within oneself, a sense of right, a moral sense, to be mutually aware, from calm with, or thoroughly, and sire, to know with, or to know thoroughly, to know together, to be mutually aware. Probably a loan translation from Greek, syneidesis, literally with knowledge. And I have another article where I mentioned syneidesis and synderesis, and you can see how the link above where the guy did a breakdown himself, and he said he's showing the syneidos, to know. When you look in syneidos and synderesis, I forget how to spell it. There's two words, and they relate to understanding morality, and this is it's a study in itself. One has morality, and one has understanding morality, and one is the expression of morality. Anyways, when I get to that article, I'll explain that as well. It's just I don't remember exactly what I wrote, so we'll have to wait till I get there. And then we have science, which is the present participle of sire, to know, which has been at the root of conscience and conscious. So to know, probably originally to separate one thing from another, to distinguish, related to synder, to cut, divide, from Proto-Indo-European root sky or ski, S-K-E-I, to cut or split. As I'm saying, there's other words. I think skel was the divide. S-K-E, I don't know why I say key. S-K-E-L is divide, and then you have S-K-E-I to cut or split. I might be wrong about skel, but I think it is divide. Anyways, they're related, so you can go look at the article, Analogy, Balance, and In Between. Etymology is pretty fascinating once you look into it and see how words are all related, and how it just doesn't make sense. What do you mean knowledge is cutting and dividing and splitting? Well, I just explained why. Because that's the way the universe is constructed, through the variability, multiplicity, and diversity of the extant objects in existence, reality of what is the universe. So everything is divided, and the universe is looked at as an organization of everything. That's why it's universe, one. It means turned into one. That's what universe is. Verse is versare, turned into one, or combined into one. It's not an actual one, but then again you have the concept of the one that created the universe. And then all the small parts create the whole, and the whole is a one thing. You can look at it that way. Anyways, there's different linguistic aspects of images in our mind in order to try to come to an understanding of reality in ourselves and the source of things. So the Proto-Indo-European root S-K-E-I is to cut, separate, divide, part, or split. Okay, so it's S-K-E-I, has divide as well. And then we have SEO, which is related as well. Sire, S-C-I-R-E, sire, to know, and SEO. SEO is Italian for knowledge, from S-K-A-I as well, to split or dissect. Relating to, in the Celtic, there's a skian or cian, knife. So you can see how, and there's also science, SEO, science, sire, all related. And the knife, what does it do? The knife cuts, it splits, dissects, divides, separates. So you see how all the things I'm talking about, how in terms of symbols, in my latest article talking more about symbols, on symbols, reality, knowledge, belief, and attachment, how we have symbols of things existing in reality. So say there was a knife or something to cut, and then we've associated cutting and dividing things with the ability to learn about reality, which is to recognize the cuts and divisions and the dissections and the splitting of what's in reality through the multiplicity, diversity, and variability of reality, and we can correlate and correspond them. And how? What's that? What do you mean? We correlate and correspond? Well, that's it. Look at conscience and look at conscious. Well, it's with knowledge, mutually aware, to know thoroughly, to know with. So with is bringing things together. So when you have things that are split and dissected, divided and apart, cut and separate, well, that's the multiplicity, diversity, and variability. But in order to learn more about reality, you can't just look at things isolated. You need to analogize. You need to analogos. If you go look at analogy, balance, and in-between articles, you'll get more understanding there. But you need to analogize. And in there I have correspond and correlate delved into as well. So this is why knowledge is related to cutting and splitting, because it's the cutting and splitting of what's in reality, and then we join it to separate one thing from another and distinguish. But so it's not all one thing, so things are separate, but we also, with knowledge, we merge things together as a conscious or conscience. It's with knowledge. So you, in terms of conscience, conscious, I guess, with knowledge, you get the knowledge. You and knowledge, you're with knowledge. So you become conscious of, conscious awareness of reality. You become aware of reality and you have knowledge of reality. And that's why evolving consciousness has to do with conscious awareness of reality. That has to do with learning. Because learning doesn't happen from an alleged personality identity of this intermediary higher self. No, it happens with you. You are the one learning. You are the consciousness that is learning. It all happens through conscious awareness of reality. It's not conscious awareness of this other being or this other personality identity that you think is you, but it's, even though it's separate and it has its own personality identity, even though you want to think it's you, well, it's not you, because you are here. And if you understand how the ego personality identity construct of your identity, well, that's a result of impositions of various kind, which I went into the other article as well. There's physical impositions, parental conditioning, social conditioning, there's the genetic impositions, there's possibly planetary impositions of frequencies and other planetary oscillations and frequencies in the universe and in the solar system, and possible astrology validity. Anyways, there's a lot of things we don't know, but there's a lot of possibilities. And the conceptual framework I've come up with uses all of these possibilities to try to make sense of them, and nowhere in when I'm trying to relate things that can make sense do I come up with the sensibility of an intermediary middleman personality identity that some people call the true self and the higher self. Whereas for me, the true self and higher self is the higher will, because God's will is the Most High's will. The Most High is the higher self, and that's the higher will, because the higher self has the higher will. The higher will belongs to the higher self, which is the Most High's will. The Most High is the self of God, and that's God's will. The will of creation, the will of creator, the will of nature. It's all the same thing. I guess some people don't make all these connections of all these different terminologies, the will of nature, the will of creation, the will of the creator, the Most High's will, higher self, higher will, how that's all the same thing, and they want to delineate that, oh no, well the higher self and the higher will, that's the true self, and that's our own personality, identity, soul, that each one has a separate one. Well, no. I've already explained this in previous audios, and it'll be coalesced into a proper explanation, into its own article or audio, video presentation, whatever, when I get into, or before I do the full natural law presentation, or as part of it, in order for additional correspondences for that framework. Anyways, that'll be in the future. But if you want more, go listen to my other articles, which are informative in their own right about whatever I'm talking about. But since one of my friends on Facebook has been adamant in putting the importance of their view and how I'm allegedly in a masculine and fixation and dualistic because I don't accept that popularized concept, and and that I'm ignoring self-knowledge because I don't see the validity for the middleman, even though if you look at all my work, how am I ignoring self-knowledge when I have a pretty good grasp and understanding on it? It's just my model is different than yours, and just because I don't accept your model doesn't mean I'm going down a dark path. Yeah, clearly I'm going down a dark path. Let's look at all my work and see how dark my path is, right? Just because I don't accept your concept of this middleman, intermediary personality identity, soul, as the higher self, higher will, true self. No, for me, the true self, higher will, higher self is related to the transcendental being, truth, love, good, right, morality. And that's why God is truth and God is good, because it's all the same thing. It's all from that one source, that one force that has different aspects to it. Or at least that's what we can conceptually derive, even though we can't really know. Consciousness originally relates to knowledge, which all animals have. Later, this represented awareness itself, since awareness is required to acquire knowledge of reality, which is what I just said. To evolve consciousness, you require conscious awareness of reality. So, anyways. And then to the more restrictive self-awareness requirement to justify our violence towards other living beings. Since existence is what is, consciousness is awareness of what is. That's all. Consciousness is conscious awareness of reality. The more you want to have a greater consciousness, you want to evolve consciousness, well then develop your conscious awareness of reality. You can start at my site. Start at Mark Passio's information and then come to my site. Because he deals with a lot of foundational material that can help you break past certain barriers. And I don't talk about all the information Mark Passio talks about. I'm going a bit deeper. I'm only dealing with psychological and natural law, consciousness aspects, whereas he goes more into other aspects of mind control, relating to reality and our systems of control and government. And all that is required information, but well, he's already covered it, so I'm not going to repeat what he says. I'm going for deeper understandings to try to break past our barriers in consciousness that prevent us from self-knowledge, self-actualization, self-realization, individuation of our true nature, of our human nature, into a more authentic human being, a more self-actualized, self-realized human being, rather than less actualized and more as an amoral animal, not concerned with truth and morality in other beings. So, take a look at my work, go to Mark Passio, go to anybody, just learn. Get conscious awareness of reality. That's how you will evolve consciousness and understand more of yourself and of reality and what needs to be done in order to realize the transcendental aspects of being in the aggregate, to create a heaven on earth rather than the hell that we're blind to seeing, and we think everything's good because we believe falsity is truth and we believe evil is good and we believe wrong is right, because we're very lost. Why are we lost? Because we have not gained conscious awareness of ourselves or reality to the degrees where we can recognize the wrongs being done through our care, and by feeling reality and feeling the sorrow and the grief of what's going on, and using that as a motivation to do something and to change things. Because we're undeveloped in our heart center compassion, and we're undeveloped in our cognitive capacities. So our internal aspects of consciousness are very undeveloped. We have undeveloped cognition, thought, and we have undeveloped affection, emotion, and therefore our actions are undeveloped and are very limited, because our thoughts and our emotions are limited. And this is a result of conditioning as well. So, as I mentioned in the previous article, if you remove all of our conditioning, the article on kind, kin, genus, and care, if you remove our conditioning, then you dissolve the ego personality identity construct, and what you're left with is just pure awareness, which is the I awareness, which is what some people gain in meditation, but you can do it all conceptually as I have done. And what you end up with is just the understanding of I awareness, and and that's what the I am is just pure awareness, and that's what God is. That's why God is the I am, because it's just pure awareness. So we're trying to make sense of things in relation to what we can experience. So when you experience that state of I awareness, the oneness, the connectedness, that oneness, well, it's not oneness because because you're a separate identity, you're dissolving your ego personality identity in order to experience the oneness of how we are all one. Because we're not all one if we're all separate souls with individual personalities and identities as a soul. That's not how it works. It doesn't make sense when you take in all the information together. And we wouldn't be the I am awareness, the pure I, which is just the source energy for us to be able to experience reality, is to have that capacity for an identity. Animals have an identity as well. They're individual units born in specific places and times, and they have different characteristics, and some of them have different personalities that develop, and you can tell them if you interconnect and correlate and connect with them, interact with them. You can see, they look the same because they just look the same to us, but they have different personality quirks. Their ego personality identity is different from others of their kind who have different ego personality identities. But the source of it all is that one, the oneness, the one pure awareness, the one I, the I am, which is God. And again, this is all conceptual. I don't have proof other than my own consciousness to try to relate these things to reality. So the proof is just in the particulars that I'm able to analyze and try to relate it to higher concepts. But there's no physical proof, because spiritual, quote, spiritual is just higher in terms of the material, which is lower, and the material is physical and material, and the quote, spiritual is just non-physical and immaterial. And that's why it's metaphysics, because that's what's behind the physical. That's why animal and human, or truth and good, does not exist in reality itself. It's an expression through aspects of reality that exist. There is no human thing. It's a universal, it's an unseen aspect of what's in reality. We're all just individual things in the variability, diversity, and multiplicity, so we categorize them through the unseen universals, what lays behind me and other things. Well, we can see the difference. This is knowledge, consciousness, conscious awareness of reality, and then we can categorize them. But it's all, at a basic level. It's all the energy, or it's all matter, and then we individuate. And so we're not all the same, but we have the same universals within us. So, humans are all humans, even though we're all different. And cats are all cats, even though they're different cats, and they have different ego personalities and identities, because they can interact with reality, and they can move and learn things and do things. So those who are against comparisons, wait, too far. Okay. Consciousness originally relates to knowledge, which all animals have. Later, oh no, I just read that. Yeah, okay. So I was saying, I'll make a little comment on self-awareness. So it went from consciousness to knowledge of reality, and then awareness, since you need awareness to acquire knowledge of reality, so all animals have awareness. And then it was self-awareness, so we went to exclusive. We want to separate ourselves from animals so that we can validate and justify our immorality and evil as an immoral animal living amorally, because we have self-awareness, so we're better. We have awareness of ourselves, and animals can't talk like we do, and they can't demonstrate self-awareness like we do, and blah blah blah, all this other bullshit, so we can do whatever we want. They're not like us, so we're disconnected from our care, our heart center, our compassion, our empathy, and our ability to recognize reality objectively. And we're just choosing a satanic survivalist mindset of my truth, my freedom, my survival, in order to validate whatever we want to validate. It's not based on objective reality, it's purely subjective. So what if we have self-awareness? Oh, let's ignore that they can feel and that they have awareness themselves. So we determine self-awareness as the determining criteria for our new definition of consciousness. Therefore, animals don't have consciousness, and they're just robots, like the moron Descartes believed. Yes, I call him a moron. So what if he had other things right? Of such a fundamental nature that's obvious in reality. I'm not talking about things you can't really prove. Things that are provable and you get them wrong, well, it makes you a moron. And when you're going to say that animals are just like machines and robots, well, sorry, you're a moron. Because you can't see reality as it is. It's right in reality. You don't need much speculative aspects of quote, spiritual unseen concepts. It's right in reality what it is. They do have awareness. They have consciousness. It's hilarious that some people can delude themselves to such a great extent that they create these inductions, these concepts, and then they just believe them even though they're not verified in reality. They have a limited data set, so they pigeonholed their vision of reality, and they're attached to their beliefs, so they don't see reality. That's I have an infographic on that in my recent article on symbols, reality, knowledge, belief, and attachment. So those who are against comparisons to recognize difference and division are against knowledge itself. This is the fundamental way we understand reality. This is discernment. To separate, set apart, divide, distribute, distinguish, perceive. So you see, everyone who wants to say, oh, judging's bad. Oh, discrimination's bad. You know what discriminating is? It's differentiation. Oh, you see differences. You just want to see differences. This is what the New Ager told me when I told them plants are not animals and you can't do what you do to plants to animals. And he says, oh, well, you just want to be a chooser. You just want to choose. Because for them it's all life. So life consumes life. So you want to be a chooser. You want to play favorites. Well, you play favorites by not murdering your child and not murdering your wife and not murdering other humans to eat them. So you're a chooser too. Like, what kind of baseless response is that? To say, oh, you're a chooser. You're choosing to eat plants and not animals. That's right. We all choose things in life. That's called free will, you moron. You stupid New Ager. God damn, it's unbelievable how some people do not have the capacity to think at all. They just don't have the capacity to think properly. So discernment, distinguish, perceive, distribute, divide, set apart, separate. It's a diagnosis, an assessment, an evaluation. When you're looking at things and the separation and dividing them and looking at how they're different or how they're same. You want to know more about that? Well, then go look at my presentation with infographics on the dualistic conceptual framework for perceiving, conceiving, understanding, and navigating reality. And it has to do with truth and our perceptions and the frequency of truth in our perceptions. And we need to judge. We judge every day. People want to tell you they don't judge. They're just lying to themselves, and they want to say, oh, you're judging. Well, you judge yourself by your own actions. I'm just capable of seeing through judgment what you're doing that you're ignoring because you don't want to judge and see yourself honestly in the mirror. So you want to be an ignorant moron. So I'm seeing what you don't want to see, and I'm telling you reality, and then you don't want to face it, so you just want to dismiss everything as, oh, that's a judgment, because you're infected with New Age feel-good bullshit beliefs. So discernment is from Krei, or Krei, K-R-E-I, which is the Proto-Indo-European root, and that's deceive, discriminate, or distinguish. Again, it's all related to knowledge. This is how you obtain knowledge. And the people who are against all these, oh, you can't differentiate, oh, you can't discriminate, oh, you can't distinguish, and you can't judge, well then congratulations on not understanding how reality functions. And continue to be lacking conscious awareness and continue to be in a low base consciousness because you're not evolving consciousness. So it is breaking open reality and seeing what it is made of rather than seeing it as one amalgamation. So you're recognizing the multiplicity, diversity, and variability in reality, and even from those basic distinctions of things that are, we ourselves can break into aspects of individuated components. So a rock is made, a human is made, different things are made, a leaf or a plant, and we can break into them and divide further and further and further. And this is the obsession with science, is to keep breaking things apart physically. They want to break things apart physically to see what the physical source is. So break things apart to get to the atom, break things apart to get to atomic particles, break things apart to get to subatomic particles, and then they still want to break things apart and break things apart because they're trying. This is the causal drive. This is how we find the source for our question of how did we get here. For the source of origins is you have to go back in causality, and that's how you arrive at the first cause, the prime mover, the unmovable mover, as the origin conceptually, because it's not physical. You can't measure it. You can't detect it. So for science, they'll never see it because it's a conceptual thing. Just like the singularity, well, maybe they can measure the energy. Well, that's why the concept of pure energy and pure awareness, pure consciousness, it can interrelate conceptually as that one source, the one God. It's all the same thing conceptually. But you have to create the connections through conscious awareness of reality in order to arrive at that connectivity. And that's what I did. I arrived at that, and that's where the transcendental being is, that one force and aspects of it, of that one force, in terms of in the spiritual, in the highest plane that we can conceive of the prime mover, the origin, God, source, spirit, singularity, all one, higher will of God, higher self, the higher self God, the true self, etc. Truth, love, good, right, morality. Well, those are aspects of transcendental being from that source. And that's the one thing, which is why it's the one way that we strive for. We strive for truth, one way. It's not polar. We're not striving for truth and falsity. We're not striving for good and evil. It's one way, which is why it's the one thing. That we're striving for the true self, the higher self, the higher will of God, the one thing. And you can understand that more through the dualistic conceptual framework presentation that I did. One way to ostensibly demonstrate, which is ostensible, is to show, to stretch in front of, and make visible, to point out. So one way to ostensibly demonstrate aspects of reality is to speak about it through diction. And that's Proto-Indo-European root D-E-I-K, to point out. So again, we start from the ground up. We have to start from reality that we can actually see, that we can point to. And that's how we can develop a greater conscious awareness of reality and to evolve consciousness so that we can formulate even more abstract conceptualizations based on particulars. Because you start with some particulars and you form a universal, and then you deduce back, and then you join more particulars, and it validates your universal. So then that universal concept is an abstraction, and you can take abstractions of abstractions. So you can take many concepts, many universals, and try to join them together as their own particulars, even though it's not the particulars in reality, as metaphysics calls it particulars. But they're parts of, they're universals within universals or something. So they're different parts, different universals, and you put all those parts together, and you can try to abstract an even greater universal. And on we can go to try to conceptually make sense of things, because we've identified ostensibly the base particulars, and then from those particulars we generate universals that we can verify again through the particulars, and then those universals can be joined with universals, concepts can be joined with concepts, and we can abstract from those abstractions. So we join particulars and we create a universal, and then we can join universals and create higher universals. And that's how we evolve consciousness, and that's how we learn more. And this I haven't mentioned anywhere in my texts anywhere, this specific process, although I have an infographic on it that I haven't released. It's in my sketchbook. So so that's why I recommend people listen to my audios, because I go into things a lot more than just in my text. In diction, speaking about reality, the need to discern it, separate and perceive different parts. So in diction, speaking about reality, we need to discern. We need to separate and perceive different parts. That's why we point them out, and then we can see them. as one thing from another, and not just all one big amalgamation. Diction is also the root for judge, a compound of jus, right or law, plus the root of dicere, to say. So just diction is to say what is right. You can be an accurate judge and say what is right to judge things, or you can be a delusional judge, and in terms of jurisdiction, where you're trying to create the law in a specific locality. We are all judges. We all judge and discern reality. The goal is to align conceptions of reality with actual reality in order to speak and say what is right, good, and true, to judge accurately, not incorrectly. Because of course you can judge inaccurately. So that's the negative form of judgment. It's not that all judgment is bad. It's just when you make a bad judgment, well, that's a bad judgment. It's that simple. When you make good judgments, well, congratulations, you made a good judgment. It's not that they're all bad. You need judgment in life. That is how you evolve consciousness. And that's why a lot of New Agers do not truly evolve consciousness, and they're stuck in a superstructure of free-floating beliefs that are not grounded in reality. And they believe whatever they want. And they believe all these fantastic things about, quote, spiritual concepts, because spiritual concepts is anything you can imagine in your head is, quote, spiritual, because it's unseen, it's intangible, it's non-physical. So anything you want to imagine, you can call it spiritual, and you can pretend it's real and believe in it. Is it real? Well, is it grounded in reality? It's not real. Concepts. Is God real? Well, it's not in reality. It's an attempt to explain origins conceptually. Maybe it does exist in its own place as I conceive of transcendental being, because I know there are ideals. In our minds, we can think of ideals. They're ideas, concepts. With certain of these concepts and ideas, we can formulate into ideals, which is why truth level 2 is the way we ought to live and should live. Because truth level 1, a reality in existence that is what is in reality, that's what actually is. It's the actual. And then we have the potential, which is truth level 2, the potential to create and manifest as the actual. So anyways, conceptually, all of this makes sense, which is why I have a high degree of veracity and verifiability in my conceptions, and I do strongly believe in them, even though there's no direct proof in reality, and there never will be, because you cannot point to something that is unseen and immaterial. You can't point to it. Or in science, if you can't measure it, then it doesn't exist. But certain things of universals, they don't exist, but we know they exist. Truth exists. Well, it's not a thing that exists in itself, not here in reality, but maybe it exists in itself somewhere else. Maybe that's what God is. Right? God is truth. God is love. God is good. They don't exist in themselves, but they exist through manifestations of us. So if it exists as a manifestation of us, then maybe they exist originally as a part of the big being, the capital B being, the transcendental being, maybe a manifestation of that echoes into consciousness, free will agents that are capable of expressing those aspects of the transcendental being. This is just my way of trying to explain things logically. Logically. I'm not holding on to any beliefs. I'm trying to make sense of things. All the different parts that I can piece together, I'm trying to unite them in a non-contradictory manner. So non-contradiction is very important. Everything that all of the concepts and ideas, I try to make sense of them by unifying them in non-contradiction, which is what syncretism is about. Syncretic is to sin together, and it's about joining various philosophies and trying to connect them into a one united whole. Which, well, that's what we're all trying to do essentially when we try to make sense of reality. We look at the particulars, we generate concepts, ideas, and universals. We try to verify them over and over, and then we can join other universals and concepts and abstract from the abstractions of the particulars in reality, abstract universals, and then join the universals and abstract from them higher universals, etc., etc. We're trying always to join things and connect things. We're trying to connect everything together to make sense of it, because that's how you understand things, is through the connection of the variability, diversity, and multiplicity in reality. You join all those things up, and then it creates a concept based on the familiarity or the differences, which is why you need judgment and discernment. You recognize the similarities and the differences. And that's explained in my presentation on the dualistic conceptual framework for how to conceive, perceive, understand, and navigate reality. And this was one of the earliest work I did, because I was analyzing why is it people can't think properly? Why is it they can't discern reality properly? Well, they have an aversion to judgment, which was one of my earlier articles too. But this whole thing on the dualistic conceptual framework centers upon being able to judge. Alright, so enough on that, on my egoistic, arrogant rant. Just kidding. I'll just mention again, arrogant is to claim to have something you do not have. So I am saying that I have a highly developed logical capacity and non-contradiction, abstraction, and joining and unification, in separation and similarity. I work on non-contradiction. Contradictions I do not accept. I try to find them out in everything. In every concept that I come across, I analyze it and I break it apart to see if things follow and they fit together. Which is why the belief in the concept of a soul or spirit with its own personality and identity as the definition for higher self and the higher will, the true self, I don't accept that, because it does not follow for me. So it could be that I'm missing particulars of reality, and I'm not able to construct a universal concept properly. But again, there's no evidence for that. The evidence for the higher self, the higher will, is, as other people have described, as the transcendental being, which I've explained laboriously in previous articles. The references that I don't know why other people can't see them, as that's the delineation, is you have us here, and then you have universals. And the first universal, the most basic, the highest universal you can come to through causality, through causal relations, not through science, but through our own minds conceptually in causality. Science only goes back to the singularity, but the singularity is what equates to the source, the one, the all, the God, etc. So when you get to that prime mover, well, then you can associate, well, that's the source, and that's actually where the higher will is, because it's God, God's will. It's the Most High, the High. He's the Most High, He's the higher self. The higher will of God's will, this is the Most High. So the Most High's will, the higher will, and hence the higher self, God's will of creation, will of the Creator. It all interconnects, non-contradictory, and there's no need for a middleman. This middleman, soul, personality, identity doesn't make sense. Until it makes sense, I will not accept it as a possible conceptual framework, because it does not make sense to me. Interestingly, KREI, which was from discernment, to see, discriminate, and distinguish, is also related to crime. Example, crime and judgment. So you see how words relate amazingly? So we have discernment, judgment, KREI, right, to set apart and divide. And then we have crime, also KREI, crime and judgment. Right, where's a crime? Well, you got to judge that there was a crime done. Through crisis, so when there's a crisis, which is the root for discernment shown earlier, Kri. Kri was in crisis, crime, crisis, are related. I have links to the etymology if you're more interested, but I didn't paste the etymology in this article for this. I just put links to Etym online for you to go look into it yourself if you're interested, if you don't believe me. And don't believe me, go look into things for yourself. Always do due diligence and do your own homework. Do not blindly believe what other people tell you, which is the problem with the world as we have it, is people don't do their own homework, they don't think for themselves, they don't verify concepts, they just get fed beliefs and concepts, they get induced with concepts, which is you're invoked The sorcerer magicians with images and concepts, they invoke into your mind through words and language other images. So you're being invoked, in magic and all that stuff, and summoning demons or summoning monsters and cartoons and movies and stuff. Well, summoning is an invocation. So they're invoking into you, they're summoning into you certain images through word magic. The words have symbols, they're symbols, images, and they get created in your mind. And this is what influences you. The images in your mind, and you get the beliefs, concepts, they get associated with your self-image and your worldview, and then you attach to them. They could become rooted as a foundation for how you understand yourself in reality, and they thereby become foundational axioms, which is how we, the drive to motivate us, and it relates to care, and then we end up caring about our foundation, which is based on falsity, so we care about falsity, and then we perpetuate falsity in the world. Anyways, this is all psychological aspects as well, but psychology is all about us and consciousness, and everyone should learn about that as well. Everyone needs to start learning for themselves. Everyone should learn about psychology, which is part of self-knowledge, and everyone should learn more about philosophy, which is, the love of wisdom, the love of right action. It's about learning about reality in order to understand, and from that understanding produce the wisdom of right action, so that you can get to creating in the world in the right way. That's what knowledge is for. That's why we have higher order consciousness, so we can make more sense and create things rightly, not just live as lower base consciousness and fleshly carnal desires and fucking like rabbits and whatever, like most people are doing. The world right now is an amoral, animalistic world. Even though people understand some aspects of morality and they don't eat each other and whatever, and some people rape and some people murder and some people steal and other people don't. But overall, everyone's stuck in the pleasure trap. Look at it when we grow up. Everywhere, the objectification of women, the sexualization of women, the abuse of women, how women are conditioned into hairstyles and fashions and earrings and piercings, and put holes in your body, and even men and women into tattoos and marking your body for whatever pointless reason, because you think it's an expression of your identity. Well, that's only because you don't even know yourself. You don't even know what it is to know yourself. You have this is how simple it is. You have images in your mind that were induced into you through conditioning, or you conditioned yourself to accept as representations of worldview and self-image. Your sense of self and the sense of the world that you understand is represented by word symbols and images. And then you're going to take these foundational axioms, which don't even represent who you truly are. They just represent impositions about how you view yourself and the world. These beliefs, and through our conditioning of our parents and society. And you take this image and you're like, oh, that represents me, so I'm going to get a tattoo of a flower, of a rose, or some description of a word or a phrase. Or it's all people who are lost and do not know how lost they are. And they think this gives meaning and is an expression of themselves, because they do not even understand themselves. And how we are all the same self. We are all the I am, conceptually. So I will not claim that this is 100% truth in reality, because it's not in reality. It's an expression through reality that we can try to derive and see, which I think I can see it in everybody, as I understand how the ego personality identity construct was created, because I've analyzed it and I've broken things down and I've detached from myself and detached from beliefs, and I've tried to make sense of things objectively in non-contradictory ways. And that's the model I've come up with, which will be explained again, as I said, in the future. And I've been breaking apart and teasing in these audios in the past, like 4 or 5 audios. I've been teasing aspects of it, but it's because it always relates back to truth and our understanding of how to discern ourselves and reality, and how to self-actualize and self-realize that it isn't a self-actualization and realization of another personality identity that some people call the true self, higher will. No, the true self, higher will is beyond that imagined intermediary that I don't see a necessity for, and it goes back to the truer, higher universal from the causal relation of origins, and that's where the true origins of us are, and that's how we're all one and the same. It's different conceptual levels, which I can eventually break down. So crime is likely from the same root as crisis, K-R-E-I, as we can see the relation in cognates of other languages. Greek has kri nesthe, which is to explain, and Latin cribrum, sieve, crimen, judge, crime, cernere, critus, to sift and separate. So as is shown, CRI, cry, relates to explain, sieve, sift, separate, hence judgment, and which is what discernment was, which was KREI, so kri, cry, and then CRI, cry, the same thing, pronounced the same way, just some slight differences. It's spelled pretty much the same way, and it's so judgment as a corollary to for criminal wrong, unjust, that is discernible in reality from non-crime, right and just. So you need to judge right from wrong, truth from falsity, morality from immorality to determine something is a crime. And you can see how discernment, which is a judgment, it's from K-R-E-I and cry, or kri, and then we have cry, C-R-I, and kri and kritus, which is where cry comes from. Crimen, cribrum from cerner, which is kritus, a past participle of kritus. So kritus, C-R-E, was C-R-I. And originally in discernment, which is a judgment and evaluation, distinguish, discriminate, etc., is K-R-E. So we had C-R-E, so we have K-R-E-I, which developed into C-R-E, and then C-R-E was C-R-I. And we see that it's related to, we have kritus and cry related to sifting and separating, which is exactly what K-R-E-I was in discernment, which is to sieve, discriminate, and separate, distinguish. It's all the same things. Etymology is amazingly fun once you understand how to get through it. And I mentioned this before. Well, no, I haven't. Other people who do etymological work in more, I call it slapstick, very loose, way too creative, not as connected. You have true theorisy and other people. It's interesting the connections they make, but I find them way too tenuous. They're very stretched. So they're trying to make connections and connect things, but they're stretching it a lot. They're stretching it a lot. I'm trying to relate etymology through direct linking of words, and they're going too much into an abstraction, very loose, very tenuous, not very strong and solid connections. They can be all valid, but they're not very strong. They're very loose. So when I watch these videos, I'm like, Jesus, how can you make all these claims when they're just not as verifiable? Whereas when we look into the etymology, we can see how they're more verifiable. So some etymological work, it can be completely valid, but when it's demonstrated, it's not as concrete as I guess the more limited form of etymological discovery that I do, which is more concrete and based in actual words and their origins. So it is a limitation. I admit that. I'm not going back and I'm not looking into Sumer and into Egypt and trying to relate symbols and visuals to the words. So that is a valid pathway to choose. But sometimes the connections that people make are very tenuous and stretched and not too credible. And that's what I have to say about that. So I do enjoy the more creative associations of etymology, but there can be some issues with it as well. So I'm trying to keep it more basic, related to words. As is shown, Cri, C-R-I, relates to explain, sieve, sift, separate, hence judgment, and as a corollary, criminal wrong, unjust, that is discernible in reality from non-crime, right and just. To discern, judge, distinguish, differentiate, diagnose, assess, evaluate, etc. are all related to understanding reality, as I outlined in my previous work on the dualistic conceptual framework. So identity is sameness, oneness, a form of the Latin idem, the same, from id, it, that one. So it, that one, and then the dem is supposed to be means the same. So I, and then same, I dem, I same. So the sameness and oneness. So you can understand that as if you're thinking back of the prime mover, the causer, the one thing. Well, yeah, that has the one identity. It's the one thing, the source of all, the sameness and oneness. It's all one, right? It's that one. But you can also look at it as in a different way, which I'm going to explain as our own identity and how we're all separate. Because identity, what I've been getting in recently, and for when I relooked at identity, I can see two levels of understanding. Just as we can have two levels of understanding in a positive and negative, in terms of passion or care, as I've done in the last audio. Identity has two levels as well, not a positive or negative, but just two levels, where you have the variability, multiplicity, and diversity of the law of identity, where A is A and A is not B. So you have human me, one, and human two, someone else. Well, we're not the same. We each have our own identity. Even though we're both human, there's a sameness and oneness in identifying as a human, but as an individual self, we're not the same. We're individuals. So, because the thing that has identity is one and whole in itself, so that's why I'm reinterpreting how the same and oneness of identity can be used, not in terms of how things are identical in one, which is, the word identical. When you look at two things and you say they're identical, that's because they're the same. If you have an identical pencil, so there's still identity. It's that pencil is not the other pencil. It's made up of different components of matter. Even though it's the same matter, it's different matter. It's that the piece of matter in one pencil is not the piece of matter in the other pencil. So that's how identity works, through the multiplicity, diversity, and variability of our ostensible physical material reality. In a conceptual way, when you look at causality, regressing back into the origins of the prime cause, the first mover, prime mover, etc., the one, the all, then you can see how identical applies in that way as a level 2 form of identity, where it's all the same thing. So Latin is identity is sameness, oneness. So I'm talking about identity as us here in terms of reality, where identity is A and A is not A. A is not B. It's A is A. And a pencil is a pencil. A pencil is identical to another pencil, but it's not in terms of our diversity, variability, and multiplicity, but it's not the same pencil because it's made of different matter. But in terms of that source oneness, well, that is the identical thing, and that's the source of everything. So you can look at identity in two different ways in the origin of the word. So identity is sameness, oneness, because the thing that has identity is one and whole in itself. It is a unit, an individual, particular substance. That's why the law of identity applies to reality, because everything is its own individualist substance composed into what it is. So at first you had the tree is a particular substance, it's a unit. It has its own identity. It's not an ego-personality identity like humans and animals have, but it's an identity. There's like a rock is an identity, and a rock is not the other rock, even though they may appear identical or whatever, have identical characteristics, but it's still a rock made up of particular matter, and that matter that's in one rock is not in another rock. And what's in one tree is not in another tree. So the tree can be cut down and then broken up, and you can make 10,000 pencils or something. And then each of those 10,000 pencils each have their own identity, even though they came from one thing that had its own identity, then was destroyed and divided, because it was still, at the point it was an individual. It was an individual, non-divided. It was a tree. It was existing as a one unit, a oneness, right? It was one and whole in itself. So it was an individual tree. And then you broke it up and you divided it. And then what was divided became the new individual whole thing. So the pencil is a whole thing, even though it's made up of parts. Everything's made up of parts in the universe. We're all made up of parts. We're made up of cells. The cells are made up of molecules and DNA and then atoms and subatomic particles. So we're all made up of parts, and creating greater complexity. So you break down the tree, you get a pencil, it's still identity, and there's still more identity, and there's always identity in the universe because everything is variability, multiplicity, and diversity. Even in the atomic level. They're identical atoms, but they're not in the same place at the same time, and that's, you produce a different identity in terms of physical nature. And that's why, as an ego personality identity construct, we are all different because we cannot occupy the same space at the same time, and we are individual identities. But that's because of the physicality that we have in identity. When you get out of the physicality of our reality, and you go back to the first cause, well, then that's an identical, and it doesn't have an identity like we know. That's anthropomorphizing. You just imagine that God is an identity because the Bible displays it as an anthropomorphized entity. That it's an entity in itself, that it can interact with people and talk to them, and it acts like a human, which is a joke, which is why people are atheists, which I made fun of in another article. Rather than think of a concept themselves, they accept the ludicrous concept of religionists and say, well, yeah, that's false. Whereas other people think things themselves, and they can accept the possibility that of a prime mover through a causal relation. All you have to do is think about it. Do I have proof of it? No, you can never have proof. You can't measure it in scientific terms. You can't point to it. But conceptually, we can arrive at that level. And that's an identical level of oneness. And from the oneness, you have the variability, multiplicity, and diversity of the universe. So it's always a relationship. It's not a dualistic falsity. It's dual. There's a lot of dualities. There's good and evil. There's true and false. Just because something is dualistic does not make it false. So you can't claim that my conception is false just because it's dualistic and it appears materialistic and it appears masculine and based in the material, and it's not feminine enough in the immaterial and in the unseen things. And these are just erroneous attributions and projections of my concept. Trying to dismiss it. It's a duality. So what? You're going to say, my dualistic conceptual framework of truth and falsity, that's false because it's a duality. That's what ignorant New Agers want to do. I've had it done to me by the person I lived with. And say, that's duality. That's dualistic thinking. No, there is actual dualistic thinking that is invalid, and there's actual dualistic thinking that is valid. People don't understand the difference between the two levels of dualistic thinking. So there's another sneak peek on individual and how identity is not the same as not individual, but a sneak peek on identity, on how identity of where we exist in reality, of the variability, diversity, and multiplicity, is not the same as the oneness that doesn't have an identity but is identical, because it's one in its whole in itself, and we are one and whole in ourselves as individuations. And the universal isn't the particular individuation, it's the universal. And lower level universals, the lowest level universal you can have before you get to the particular, which is at the species level, that is in a universal individual, not a particular individual. You have universals and particulars, individual particulars, but you can have the lowest level universal before you get to the individual particular is where you have the individual universal or universal individual, which is where the essence is found, which is where the definition is found, and identity. So where you have identity of the species, well, that's where we're human, right? We're identical in that way. But we also have, again, the lower level identity where everything is separate, as a diversity, variability, and multiplicity of things in existence, in reality, in the universe. And again, the universe turned into or combined into one. Turned into one. So again, there's always the duality at play of the variability, diversity, and multiplicity, and the oneness. It plays out in different ways. The oneness of the universe, and the variability, diversity, and multiplicity of everything in the universe. And then we go back up again, and we have the oneness of the one energy field, right? And then quantum mechanics. So it goes back from this is in my metaphysics, language, and reality fundamentals to the trivium method. If you want to look at that, it's near the end, and I explain this. This is a valid duality as well. So you can't invalidate my concept just because you read a new book. And this is also another thing. When you've read something new, it infatuates you. The new thing has a direct, just like when there's the dopamine fix of new stimulus, we go for new things and we're attracted to attempt to multitask because the new information provides a stimulus and it can create a neurochemical effect, and it's attractive for us to keep dividing our attention to multiple things. So when you come across something new, it can infatuate you and have an effect over you because it's impactful. You just read it. It's fresh in your mind as a concept in itself, and then over time, you can start to take it apart and see how it has some issues. So when I first came across Alex Jones, you get infatuated. That's why I've talked about this too. There's a cult of personality of a person, and there's a cult of idea personality, where you can get infatuated with an idea, not only a person, because an idea can also love bomb you just like another person. That the words influence you and they affect your self-image and worldview, your sense of self and sense of reality, and thereby it creates a desire for that belief to be, or that concept to be, because of how it affects your sense of self and worldview, and it gives you comfort and security from that by providing you with an answer. And it could have been you didn't even have the question, but when you have the answer, then it answers a question that you might not have had. So if you remove that answer, that concept, that belief, then you're left with a hole that isn't filled, and that can provide doubt and insecurity and discomfort. So we can often be attached to concepts because we are infatuated with them, because of the effect they have on us. Just as we can be infatuated with other people and be devoted to them, we can be infatuated and devoted to a concept and not see reality clearly, which is why I made the recent article on symbols, reality, knowledge, belief, and attachment. So, as I was saying, Alex Jones, I got into that. After 9 months, I left because I saw his manipulative nature. But you're infatuated with the one who provides you with something new and invigorating. So a concept can be invigorating when you're learning about reality and the power of learning about conscious awareness and evolving consciousness, and it affects you and it brings you to greater understanding. But you can attribute that to a person, and it's a cult of personality. And it applied for a little bit with Mark Passio. It didn't take me as long to get out of it, and then he speaks and he induces concepts into your mind, and then you believe them, but you don't verify them yet. But you're believing them because they're fresh and they sound good, and it provides answers and it connects things. So you just accept it, and then you get infatuated with the belief, but also infatuated with the person. You can have a cult of idea, and you can have a cult of personality. So we need to detach from people, and we need to detach from ourselves and concepts, and always look at objective reality to see if we can tie back those ideas, those concepts, those general universal concepts, and see if they actually match with reality. And we have to keep doing this over and over. And so I have found things that were erroneous in what other people have said, and Alex Jones and other people like Mark Passio. And the biggest one, Passio, has a lot of great stuff and everything's pretty good. But earlier on, he was still influenced by New Agers, which he got out of, and I became influenced by New Agers as a result. And I looked into Greg Braden and Wayne Dyer and all this crap, and then I had to eventually break out of it. And it was around the same time Mark was putting out his New Age bullshit. But I had figured out that there was also, when I broke out of the infatuation with all those concepts of New Agery and pseudo-spirituality, that there's an aspect of the dual slit experiment that is explained incorrectly in terms of absolute certainty, and that is of human consciousness is what creates reality, and that is absolutely false. People who want to claim that do not understand the double slit experiment. So I looked into that for days and many hours in research over many weeks, and I understood what really happens in that experiment, and I made an article about it. So, when you blindly believe what someone tells you because it has a syncretic connectivity with making sense of reality, with providing you with a sense of understanding, a sense of comfort through a sense of reality and a sense of yourself that seems to make sense. It sounds good, but that's all because of it's a new thing and you're infatuated by it, and it affects you at a cognitive and affective level, and then you get attached to it. So that's the cult of idea, and as well the cult of personality, and then you gain trust in people. And this is how it works everywhere in the world, in politics and everything. People they summon spells, they cast spells of word magic, and it summons and invokes images inside of your consciousness, which then you become attached to those images because the images become a reflection of how you view yourself and how you view the world. This is why psychology is so important. I've not heard anyone talk about psychology to the depth I am talking about psychology in terms of self-image and self-construct, and which is why I understand how the ego personality identity construct is created. People have not gone into the depth of understanding how we are formed ourselves as people on this planet in reality. And then you'll be able to apply that understanding that's been applied in many places of variability, diversity, and multiplicity, and how that turns into and is combined into one, the universe. But that applies also in terms of what we can conceptually refer to as a source for consciousness, as the pure awareness and the I awareness of the I am in God, and how that is the one thing and how we are individuations of that. But nowhere does it necessitate a personality identity of a middleman soul spirit individuation. It's just a form of energy. Just like the field, the one field. This is where you can apply correspondence and analogy and as above so below and all that stuff, and then holographic. Ik is it's a characteristic of it. Doesn't mean it's a hologram, it's a holographic. The principles of a hologram, self-similarity, as above so below, apply in knowledge. That's what analogies are for. Correspondences. It doesn't mean it's a hologram. It doesn't mean it's a fractal. It means it's holographic. It's fractographic. It's like a hologram. It's like a fractal in operation. It's not a literal fractal, and it's not a literal hologram. The universe might be a literal hologram, but from the evidence I've seen, no. It's only a possibility. People who want to claim this is a truth, they just lie to themselves because they're attached to their belief. It might be true, but you don't know it. See, the people need to distinguish between what you know, as can be verified in reality, and a body of knowledge you can know of. So you can know of a body of knowledge, but it's not something known. There's a different dimensions and applicability, different levels to the word know. You can know of something and you can know it as a truth in reality. There's two different things. And you can know of possibilities and you can know of concepts, of bodies of knowledge, but do you know that is true? Have you verified it? Or do you simply believe in it? Well, that's the difference between knowing and believing, between truth and belief. Truth level 1, what is? Truth level 2 is from our consciousness and what we can envision as an ideal by comparison with what we have now, what we can create that is better than what we have now. So again, from consciousness, the ideal, the idea, internally, in consciousness, in the unseen, quote, spiritual realm of consciousness, well, that's where we get the idea, the ideal, the perfected state, what is good and better than what we have now. So then that reference to consciousness, the internal state, the quote spiritual aspect of ourselves, because it's immaterial and unseen, the consciousness internally, and that's associated with the spirit outside. And since that's where the ideal comes from the quote internal spiritual sense, well then we look at the ideal as the spirit, and we look at the ideal as as the spiritual domain, and the potential that exists as an actual in the quote spiritual domain, because we can actualize it in our minds in the multiverse of our consciousness, and then the subjective reality, and then we can produce that as an action in objective reality. And so that's where maybe people are getting confused on different things. And anyways, it's all a relation to ourselves, how we can make sense of other things, which is why there's a huge degree of anthropomorphization in our concepts of things beyond ourselves that are not us, although we think they're us because we like to anthropomorphize, as that's how we like to project, and that's how we try to make sense of things in many cases, is we try to relate them in reference to us, and sometimes we're blinded to reality and what is, and then we end up just projecting ourselves onto things. And that's a false mirror, where we're just copying ourselves onto reality. And sometimes there's the other mirror, where we copy what we think we see in reality onto ourselves, and we become a reflection of reality. And other times we try to reflect ourselves onto reality. We try to reflect ourselves onto things. And the things that we see in our minds, which aren't actual reflections, well, we project them onto other people and onto other concepts. And that's why you end up with a lot of human qualities attributed to God, and in the Bible and things like this. This is all psychologically based and attachment based, and anyways, all the stuff I've already been talking about in this audio and other audios. Identity is an aspect of existence. The things we point out in existence stand out on their own because they are one from the many. They are separate. So they stand out on their own. So again, you can see how there's two aspects to identity, as I mentioned before. There's the whole oneness identical of the higher aspect, and then there's the lower aspect, and it is dualistic, but so what? It's the way it is. Good and evil is dualistic. Right and wrong is dualistic. Get over it. Go look at my dualistic conceptual framework if you still don't understand that properly. Dualisms are valid. Some of them aren't. Some either-ors are false dichotomies, and that's where it's a false duality, but it relates to reality. When you're dealing with intangible things like truth, love, good, well, that's where dualistic frameworks do apply. And within the variability and multiplicity, that's where you have a secondary duality that doesn't apply in specifics either-or. In a conceptual way, because they're actual things in reality. And then anyways, I think I have this as a comment in more elaborate detail on the dualistic conceptual framework. I added it recently because of a comment I made on Facebook to explain this to someone in more detail. So I added it there about these two aspects of how we collapse the first conceptual duality, say of good and evil, and then we look at the variability, multiplicity, and diversity of things within that framework. And we look at one thing in relation to another, and we can see how they're relative to each other. And well, does one have more aspects of this or less aspects of that? Anyways, I'll continue with my article. This is going on very long. Instead of being flat page, existence props up objects for us to discover and unveil hidden universals that many particulars in reality share at a substantial or non-substantial level. Existence is what is, consciousness is aware of what is, and identity simply is whatever it is. So existence is what is, consciousness is you're aware of what is, and identity simply is whatever it is. When we come to know reality in greater degrees of accuracy, when we are consciously aware to greater degrees, it is to be conscious, to be with knowledge. To have knowledge within oneself, the quality knowledge of reality and ourselves, is, as the etymology describes it, to have knowledge of the sense of right, a moral sense. That's how you develop morality, is by having greater conscious awareness of things in reality, and of knowledge in ourselves, and quality knowledge of truth versus falsity, of right versus wrong, which is what will bring you to a sense of right and a moral sense. It all has to do with conscious awareness. Knowledge brings you to truth, quality knowledge. The basic purpose of the foundation of knowing reality and identity of evolving consciousness is morality. That's the goal of consciousness in the end. Why? Well, again, small being, the manifested consciousness in reality, what's the goal? Well, it's to become more of the aspects of the transcendental being, the big B being, which, as I've described, is truth, love, good, right, morality. So that's the goal. As it's described in etymology through the word conscience, which relates to conscious, consciousness relates to conscience, and conscience is related to morality, the sense of right and the moral sense. You see how etymology is describing how things work? Because it's all, once you understand where symbols, how they were created, it's to reflect reality. Symbols were made in order to reflect reality accurately. They didn't try to make symbols to not reflect reality and talk about purple elephants. No, they're talking about, it was all to try to understand reality. It was all with the right purpose. And then later, you got people who understand language and they become sorcerers, dark occultists, quote sorcerers, just in the sense that they cast word magic spells on our minds and influence us with images to manipulate us into falsity. And it takes us away from the sense of right and the moral sense. So they're using false knowledge to manipulate us. So the basic purpose and foundation of knowing reality and identity of evolving consciousness is morality, objective truth regarding right and wrong behavior in reality in order to progress along the positive evolutionary pathway of the force and will of creation, which is again higher will, the will of creation, the higher will. It's not an intermediary personality, identity, soul, higher self, true self, higher will. No, the force and will of creation is the higher will, is the higher self, is the true self, the I am. It's all conceptual. For what purpose? It's all spiritual. Conceptual is in our mind. Again, it's internal, it's unseen, it's immaterial, hence spiritual. See, these are all words, so you can see the great degree of possibility where all of the, quote, spiritual concepts that have been derived over millennia have been purely based in speculative notions where subjective reality has been taken as literal reality of other dimensions or other aspects of higher existence or whatever. I don't know if they're real or not, but I'm just telling you how we relate things and how we can be confused about how we describe relations of ourselves and reality. Because we look at unseen, well, that's consciousness, that's us, so we're the spirit and consciousness, and whatever we imagine in the spirit of consciousness is what exists in the spiritual dimension. So anything you imagine can become real in a spiritual dimension. You see how that's more New Age things where, your thoughts exist in another dimension and then they exist in themselves? That's just because you're applying blind correspondence and analogy to everything. You're not thinking things through. It could be that ideas exist in themselves. I don't know. What validation do you have of that other than your own subjective reality, imagination of inventing this concept? For what purpose does any knowledge have to serve us if it leads to our self-destruction? That's the point of morality and knowledge and evolving consciousness. It's all for morality, to do good, to actualize transcendental aspects of being, the aspects of transcendental being. In the end, all that knowledge is worthless and results in evil due to the absence of objective moral understanding and reality. So that's the end of the audio. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day. Take care. Peace.